Have you ever wondered why you'll call sea creatures monsters, but rarely apply that label to land animals? Maybe it's because the ocean has always hidden its nightmares better. Across Earth's long chaotic history, no environment has been more alien, more brutal, and more consistently terrifying than the seas. From colossal jaws to coiling tentacles and speed blur predators, the ocean has always offered a buffet of evolutionary horrors. A realm where size, ferocity, and mystery reign supreme. But there was one ancient sea that didn't just terrify, it transformed the fate of a continent. Around 100 million years ago, North America was split in half by a vast tropical corridor of water called the Western Interior Seaway. This wasn't just some shallow spillway. It became an incubator for evolutionary extremes, a region so rich, so deadly, that it's been nicknamed Hell's Aquarium. And what's more shocking, when that sea finally drained, the land it left behind became home to another set of monsters, the ones we know best. Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, Ankylosaurus. All of them emerged in the fertile aftermath of the Seaway's retreat, forming the foundation of one of the most legendary ecosystems Earth has ever seen, the Hell Creek Formation. Roughly 100 million years ago, North America was undergoing violent change. While it may have looked familiar from space, on the ground, it was an entirely different story. Massive tectonic collisions between plates were reshaping the land. Frequent volcanic eruptions sent ash into the skies and molten rock over the ground. In short, North America was being ripped apart. But in the chaos, something strange and enormous began to form. As the Farallon Plate was subducted beneath the continent, a gigantic depression opened in its central region, a basin that stretched from modern-day Canada all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. At the same time, Earth's climate was much hotter, with no polar ice caps and extremely high sea levels. Combine this with the basin, and the result was catastrophic. Water from the Arctic Ocean began pouring southward, while tropical waters surged north from the Gulf of Mexico. Eventually, the two met in the middle, forming one continuous inland sea, the Western Interior Seaway. At its peak, this inland ocean measured over 3,200 kilometers long and up to 970 kilometers wide, slicing North America clean in two. Yet, despite its massive footprint, the seaway was remarkably shallow, rarely deeper than 2,500 feet. That's less than the maximum depth of 6 modern lakes, and nowhere near the abyssal depths of today's oceans. In many ways, it was like a vast, tropical bathtub, and that made it lethal. Because of its shallow depth, sunlight penetrated most of the water column, supercharging coral reefs, plankton blooms, and the epipelagic zones, the upper levels of the sea where life is densest. Warm, sunlit, and nutrient-rich, the seaway became an explosion of biodiversity. It also functioned as a mega watershed, collecting enormous amounts of runoff from the land masses it divided, the newly formed protocontinents of Laramidia in the west and Appalachia in the east. These streams poured in minerals and organic matter, enriching the sea like soup constantly fed by frost. This warm, diluted mix of oceanic water and land runoff created countless habitats, all existing alongside deep-water zones and coastal reefs. Each niche was filled by something terrifying or strange. Simply put, this was life on steroids. And the seaway didn't just encourage life, it specialized it. It shaped its creatures into monsters. With so much light, heat, and food saturating the Western Interior Seaway, evolution got creative and monstrous. This inland ocean wasn't just biologically rich, it was a crucible for some of the most terrifying predators the planet has ever known. It wasn't called Hell's Aquarium for nothing. At the top of the food chain were the mosasaurs, marine reptiles that looked like nightmarish blends of Komodo dragons, monitor lizards, and crocodiles, supercharged for aquatic slaughter. The largest and most famous among them was Mosasaurus hoffmanni, a beast with a head the size of a grown man and a jaw lined with banana-thick teeth, ideal for tearing through almost anything, including other mosasaurs. While Mosasaurus gets the spotlight, it wasn't the most common. That honor went to other terrifying cousins like Tylosaurus, Platecarpus, and Clydastes, each equipped with streamlined bodies, enormous eyes, and skulls adapted for high-speed ambushes. But the seaway wasn't ruled by reptiles alone. It was also patrolled by giant sharks, many of which rivaled or exceeded the size of today's great white sharks. These were not timid swimmers. Some, measuring over 16 feet long, were hyper-predatory, aggressive, and fast, with jaws built for ripping through armored fish and even juvenile mosasaurs. In fact, fossil evidence suggests these sharks may have been even more troublesome than mosasaurs in some areas, able to outmaneuver their reptilian rivals and dominate coastal zones. Then came the giant bony fish, which could grow to man-swallowing sizes. These weren't your average groupers. Many had grotesque skulls, massive mouths, and eternal jaws designed for vacuuming up prey whole. They were opportunists. Fish, reptiles, birds, anything that fit disappeared. And lurking even deeper were the krakens of their time, massive, shelled, and soft-bodied cephalopods. Most legendary of all was Parapuzosia sepenredensis, a behemoth ammonite whose shell alone stretched over 8 feet across. It's estimated this creature could weigh up to 1.5 tons, making it nearly 3 times heavier than the modern colossal squid. In a world full of swimmers, its curling tentacles were the nightmare lurking in the murk. Not every resident was a brute, of course. Some were elegant gliders, like plesiosaurs, which dined on fish and squid. Others were massive but mellow, such as the giant sea turtle, Archelon, a peaceful creature weighing up to 3 tons, making it nearly twice the size of the largest leatherback turtles alive today. Still, none of this compares to the airborne predators drawn to this buffet of life. The nutrient-rich waters attracted fleets of pterosaurs, the most iconic being Pteranodon, a toothless fish hunter with a wingspan of 20 feet. And what makes this species even more extraordinary is its sheer abundance. We've found over 1,200 specimens, making it arguably the most successful pterosaur ever. But the seaway didn't just feed flyers. It shaped the coasts, and with that came something terrifying. Deinosuchus, a literal bone-crushing crocodilian. This absolute unit could weigh up to 8 tons, had armored skin thick enough to deflect attacks, and most importantly, jaws with enough power to obliterate bone. While it hunted in brackish coastal regions and river systems connected to the seaway, it wasn't strictly marine. It could, and did, haunt the edges, striking out at both aquatic and terrestrial prey, including dinosaurs that strayed too close. When the western interior seaway carved through the middle of North America, it did more than just drown the land. It split the continent in two. For millions of years, this division gave rise to 2 massive island continents, Laramidia in the west and Appalachia in the east. Each was a biological laboratory, isolated just enough to evolve their own unique ecosystems, and what followed was a divergent explosion of dinosaurs. Let's start with Laramidia, the narrow western strip that hugged the coast of the seaway. Despite being long and thin, it became one of the most dinosaur-rich places on the planet, with fossil records showcasing an astonishing variety of species. The terrain here was rugged, with mountains, floodplains, and dense forests, creating a buffet of ecological niches. One of the most striking features of Laramidia was its titanic dinosaurs. It was home to numerous sauropods, the long-necked giants, which were far less common on the opposite coast. These creatures coexisted with powerful ceratopsids, most notably the iconic Triceratops, and its even rarer cousin, the Torosaurus. Their hulking bodies and massive horned skulls made them nearly untouchable and incredibly intimidating. Equally terrifying were Laramidia's armored dinosaurs, like the Ankylosaurus, a 4-legged biological tank that weighed up to 8 tons. With thick bony plates and a tail club that could deliver bone-crushing blows, it wasn't just protected, it was a counteroffensive weapon walking on legs. And yet, the top predator of Laramidia dwarfed them all in both fear factor and fossil fame, the Tyrannosaurus rex. With a bite force exceeding 60,000 newtons, this 12.5-ton predator was the undisputed apex of the region, at least when it wasn't bickering with its own kind. Fossil evidence shows injuries consistent with intraspecific combat and possibly even cannibalism. As if all of that wasn't enough, Laramidia also hosted a plague of snakes, massive ornithomimids, and a shocking number of insects, some of which could make modern-day pests look tame by comparison. Now, cross the sea and things begin to shift. Welcome to Appalachia, the eastern counterpart. Equally fascinating, but very different in structure and fauna. Appalachia lacked many of Laramidia's giants, but don't let that fool you. What it had in spades was diversity. Here, the predators were often smaller, but in some ways more dangerous. The dominant group was the Dryptosaurids, a family of nimble tyrannosauroids with longer arms and razor-like claws. They may not have been as massive as T-Rex, but they were fast, agile, and perfectly adapted to bring down mid-sized prey, or even tear apart wounded sauropods. The region also had a surprising infestation of dromaeosaurs, raptor-like dinosaurs, and nodosaurids, heavily armored herbivores with spiky exteriors. And then came the curveball. At least one type of Carcharodontosaur, the same group as Giganotosaurus, appears to have called this land home. Though unnamed, its presence in Appalachia suggested a more chaotic food web than once assumed. And while T-Rex ruled Laramidia, crocodilians began to seize power in Appalachia. Chief among them was Deinosuchus, found in greater numbers here than anywhere else. But it wasn't alone. Appalachia teemed with semi-aquatic, fully aquatic, and even terrestrial crocs. many of which were large enough to take on dinosaurs and win. In fact, fossil distribution shows that crocs began outnumbering top theropods in some regions, making Appalachia a literal death swamp for the unprepared. It's also worth noting that in the earlier stages of the Seaway, Appalachia may have been the stomping grounds for legends like Acrocanthosaurus and Alaskacephalae, though how long they persisted remains debated. In short, while Laramidia had the towering titans and the biggest of the big, Appalachia had the deadliest diversity, smaller killers, crocs, and some mystery giants hiding in the woods. The Seaway didn't just split the land, it forced evolution into overdrive on both sides. This duality of west versus east, giants versus shadows, theropods versus crocs, created an unparalleled hotspot of biodiversity across the continent. And yet, this was only the beginning, because as the Seaway began to shrink, the monsters of both Laramidia and Appalachia were about to be squeezed into a new battleground, a place where the seas retreated, the forests rose, and the world prepared to meet its most famous creatures yet. As the western interior Seaway began its final retreat some 70 to 66 million years ago, it left behind more than just sediment. What it created was a stage, one of the most biologically intense and dangerous landscapes in the entire history of the planet. This was Hell Creek, a name that even today conjures images of ferocity, giants, and extinction. The Seaway didn't vanish overnight. Over millions of years, tectonic uplift caused sea levels to drop, draining away the saltwater that had once split North America. In its place emerged a vast floodplain filled with swamps, rivers, lakes, and dense forests. This rich and humid environment became the perfect haven for life, but also for death. Because what made Hell Creek truly infamous wasn't just that it supported life, it was the kind of life it supported. It became the throne of a king, Tyrannosaurus Rex. No longer sharing the apex predator role with other massive theropods, T-Rex stood alone at the top of the food chain, and the numbers speak volumes. Over 85% of all known T-Rex specimens come from this formation. Fossils indicate it was the second most common large dinosaur in the area, and that it was not only a fearsome hunter, but also a social, possibly even cannibalistic creature. Several skulls show signs of violent intraspecific conflict, bite marks from others of its kind. Built like a biological siege engine, T-Rex remains unmatched in sheer destructive power. At full size, possibly up to 12.5 tons, with the biggest specimen named Scotty, it was a living freight train. Its skull, the size of a grown man, was filled with banana-sized teeth, capable of crushing bone to powder with over 60,000 newtons of force. And for those who thought its arms were useless, think again. They could lift half a ton and pin struggling prey like clamps. And it wasn't even alone. Whether it was a juvenile T-Rex or its own genus, what's certain is that it was fast, dangerous, and large enough to bring down human-sized prey. It wasn't the only one though. Raptors prowled the shadows. The most common of these was the Acaroraptor, a close cousin to Velociraptor, which actually lived in Asia. Acaroraptor was larger, reaching about 3 meters in length, and equipped with a sickle claw and serrated teeth. Though not as strong in the bite department, it made up for it with speed and repeated slashing attacks. Death by 1,000 cuts. Even scarier, a less common but much larger Dromaeosaur, the debated Dakotaraptor. This beast reached up to 6 meters long, possibly weigh more than a grizzly bear, and had terrifying 9-inch slashing claws, enough to eviscerate any animal it attacked. Some question its legitimacy, citing possible composite fossils, but whatever the case, the bones came from something, and whatever it wasn't friendly. But Hell Creek wasn't just carnivores. Its herbivores were equally intimidating. Take Triceratops, for instance. Far from a passive grazer, this 10-ton beast had 2 horns over a meter long, and skull shows signs of having gored even T-Rex. In fact, it's the only dinosaur with direct fossil evidence of having wounded a Tyrannosaurus. Intraspecific combat was also common. Over 14% of all Triceratops skulls show battle damage. Then there was the Torosaurus, another massive ceratopsid, adding even more horns and bone armor to the environment. And these weren't even the best armored beasts around. That title likely goes to Ankylosaurus, the heaviest armored dinosaur ever. At up to 8 tons, it was a living tank, with osteoderms larger than dinner plates covering its back and a massive tail club that could shatter bones, possibly even the legs of a T-Rex. So far, it's the only large Hell Creek herbivore with no evidence of having been successfully attacked by predators. That alone says enough. Even the so-called softies were intimidating. The Edmontosaurus, a hadrosaur, could grow over 13 meters long and weigh more than a T-Rex. With powerful legs, a muscular tail, and herd behavior, it was far from defenseless. Even Hell Creek's pachycephalosaurs came oversized. One specimen neared half a ton, and their domed skulls were battered from repeated impacts with each other. And then there were the ornithomimids and oviraptors. Not huge, but fast, agile, and sometimes omnivorous. The standout here is the Struthia mimus, which may have run at 80 kilometers per hour, nearly twice Usain Bolt's speed. Birds also evolved alongside this chaos. One standout is Magnaviavis, meaning big bird, one of the largest avian dinosaurs of the time. And Hell Creek may even have played host to the first true birds, a testament to how much life the dying seaway gave birth to. Yet Hell Creek wasn't only land. In a twist few expected, it gave us one last sea monster. In 2021, researchers found a massive mosasaur fossil here, despite Hell Creek being mostly inland by that time. Estimated at 11 to 15 meters, this individual rivaled the giants of the seaway. Whether it was a stray survivor, a freshwater-adapted population, or a sign the sea temporarily returned, it cemented Hell Creek's place as a land of legends and nightmares. Because nowhere else in Earth's history, not even the jungles of the Carboniferous or the oceans of the Ordovician, did so many iconic, deadly, and colossal animals converge in one spot. It was the crown jewel of dinosaur evolution, and yet it was also the last hurrah. And that leads to one final chapter, a factory reset of Earth's ecosystems. As mighty as Hell Creek was, not even its legendary roster could survive what came next. Roughly 66 million years ago, a piece of rock, estimated to be about 10 to 12 kilometers wide, slammed into Earth, near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The result was cataclysmic. This wasn't just a regional disaster, it was planetary annihilation. In seconds, a blast wave flattened everything for hundreds of kilometers. Within minutes, mega tsunamis surged across coastlines. And in the days that followed, wildfires erupted worldwide. But the true death knell came in the months ahead, as a thick layer of ash and aerosols choked the sky, shutting down photosynthesis, crashing food chains, and plunging the world into a nuclear winter. It is known to science as the Cretaceous-Paleogene Extinction Event, or KPG for short, and it brought about the end of the dinosaurs, or at least the non-avian ones. Hell Creek, for all its power, was ground zero for some of the worst devastation. The fossil record here tells a dramatic story. Above its rich dinosaur layers lies a thin boundary of iridium, the signature of the impact. And above that, a vastly changed world. A place where T-Rex, Triceratops, and Ankylosaurus are suddenly gone. And they weren't alone. Around 75% of all life on Earth perished, including nearly all the great marine reptiles like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, giant sea turtles, and countless fish, insects, and plants. It was the single most important biological reset in Earth's history since the Permian extinction. And yet, in that aftermath, the seeds of the modern world were planted. Mammals, long overshadowed, began to rise. Birds, the last living dinosaurs, diversified. Crocodilians held on in the margins. And the land that once was Hell Creek, now battered but fertile, began writing a new chapter. Today, it's quiet. The rivers still flow. The forests have returned. But beneath the soil of Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas lies a time capsule of chaos, dominance, and death. Every fossil dug from the rocks is a whisper from the last age of giants. And perhaps that's the strangest truth of all. Even in their extinction, the creatures of Hell Creek remain immortal. Through science, through imagination, and through every child who's ever looked at a T-Rex skeleton and wondered what it would be like to run into one. If you enjoyed this prehistoric journey, hit subscribe, and join us next time in the Extinct Wild. Stay curious.